I swear to God, if your dwarves speak in that Highland accent, you know the one? Gravelly voice, lots of rolling R's, sounds like they just walked off the set of Braveheart. I have a particular set of skills, and I will find you, and I will slap you, gently, but firmly, with a world building book. Because Highland Dwarves are from the devil. Not only are they from the devil, but they are so overdone, laddie. We have wrung that trope dry and spat all the remnants of juice from our mouth. Welcome to the final episode on the series on creating fantasy species. I'm your host, Marie Mullaney, and today we're diving into the 5 biggest mistakes I see people make when building their own fantasy species. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Alrighty, let's kick this off with the exact thing I ranted about in the opening: tired tropes and cliches. Now, let me be clear, I am not a trope snob. I love me a good elf. I think some cliches are totally fine. And I'm not going to judge you if you've got dwarves or dragons or whatever in your world. But here's the thing. I don't want the same freaking elf. If I think of something like the Chronicles of Rayara, those were very elfy elves. They were Tolkien-esque in their physiology and descriptions. And the world itself was basically a D&D setting. And yet it worked. It was well thought out, well integrated, and the elven culture felt strong and unique. And that is the key. If you're going to use a standard fantasy trope species, and I think that's completely fine, then you need to give it your own spin. So ask yourself, what does this species offer your world that a completely unique species wouldn't? What does this familiar fantasy concept do for your story? How does it fit organically into your cultures? Now, sometimes it absolutely is worth using these standard fantasy species because they come with preloaded reader expectations. When I say dragon, you get an image in your head. Maybe you see a Western dragon, maybe you see an Eastern dragon, but either way, you see a powerful, magical lizard that breathes fire. And that means that I don't have to waste time describing every single detail about dragons. I just have to tell you what's different about my dragons. You, as the reader, already knows the baseline. And that's why base concepts are a powerful tool. It lowers the barrier of entry into the world. The reader doesn't have to memorize 15 new fantasy species just to understand what's going on. Take dragons again as an example. We have dragon riders of Pern with their telepathic dragon bonds. Then you've got dragons of a Song of Ice and Fire, which is the same idea. There's a bond between man and dragon, people who ride dragons. But no one confuses Pern for a Song of Ice and Fire, and no one confuses a Song of Ice and Fire for Pern. And that's because Anne McCaffrey and George R.R. Martin wrote very different dragon riders, even though it's the same trope, the dragon rider trope. In each of their worlds, the dragon riders serve a different purpose, and the dragons themselves serve different narrative purposes. And that's the key to using the familiar framework that allows you to lower that barrier to entry. But you still have to give that framework your own decoration, your own history, your own purpose and color in your world. But whatever you do not give your dwarves a Scottish accent. That trope is done. Take it out behind the sauna, bury it, and do not let it resurface for at least 15 years. I need that time. We all need that time. All right, with that out the way, let's move on to mistake number 2, going too far. So sometimes when I'm working with writers or world builders, I get this as a statement. I want to make a species that has no human emotion. It doesn't think like us. It doesn't feel like us. It doesn't even experience time like us. And I go, cool, 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 cool. Is that your point of view character? And they say, yes. And I say, okay, but who's going to read your story? Because unless the alien jellyfish from Sector 12 is picking up your novel, your reader is going to be human. And if there's nothing human in that character, no emotions, no frame of reference, then your reader is going to bounce out of your book. They might read a paragraph and go, huh, that's weird, and then put it down, because there's nothing for them to connect with. There's no hook, no heartbeat, no humanity to pull them in. That's the thing. Your weird, wonderful species can be as bizarre and out there as you want, but you have to give the reader something to latch onto. A desire, a fear, an emotion, something. Because unless I've missed a major plot point in our world, your entire readership is still made up of humans. And if you're not human and you're listening to this, let me know in the comments, because I have questions. Now, you can go as far off the beaten path as you like. Just leave a breadcrumb trail back to the reader. Let me give you an example. I once read a completely bizarre science fiction short story called The Logic Pool by Stephen Baxter. It was about sentient mathematical equations. Actual sentient axiom change inside a literal logic pool. And these little guys are point of view characters with scenes focused on their evolving attempts to escape and the ethical fallout of culling them, what that does to them as a species. It was the weirdest story I've ever read. Absolutely bananas. But every time we switched to the point of view of the equations, they had this desperate drive. They wanted to escape their containment, to exist in the real world, to become something more. And I was like, okay, that's weird. But also, I get that. I know what it feels like to want to be seen, to break free, to be real. I see you, equations, and I'm here for your story. And that's what you need to do when you're making your weirdest, most alien out there species. You can go full-blown cosmic jellyfish that communicate in light pulses, but give it something human. Something the reader can grab onto and say, yeah, I know that feeling. I see you, cosmic jellyfish. I am with you. Now look, maybe I'm the only one who bonded emotionally with sentient math. That story is probably not winning any popularity contests. But even so, it had something I could connect with. If it hadn't, I would have bailed halfway through the first paragraph, no matter how clever the premise was. And that is my takeaway. Go as wild and as strange as you want, just don't forget the reader. They're human. Probably. Speaking of things humans can relate to, if you would like to read some of my epic fantasy, my Sangwheel Chronicles is out now. It's a complete 4-book epic set in a fully secondary world, and you can dive into it today. The main character is an assassin named Louis, but the series expands to include other point of view characters starting in book 2. Oddly, it doesn't have any non-human species. Everyone's a human. Because in that particular world, I didn't need non-humans to tell the story I wanted to tell. So you won't be able to judge me on anything I've said in this video, only on all the things I've said in other videos. Anyway, if you want to check it out, there are links down below to where you can buy it, or you can head over to the Kickstarter for World Building Blueprints, and there you can buy copies that you will get with a signed bookplate from me, which you can stick in the book or you can stick on a wall. Dealer's choice. The Kickstarter will stay open for late pledges until around December or so. Alrighty, with that out the way, let's move on to mistake number 3, breaking your own logic. There's actually 2 ways to make this mistake, depending on what kind of creature you are building. Option 1, you're working with a completely fantastical creature. We talked about this in the earlier video on mythic creatures and mythic logic, and that's linked in the information card. This is when you've created something like an ethereal cosmic jellyfish or a metaphysical dragon that swims through magic currents. It's completely not bound by real-world ecology. It doesn't need to eat or sleep or poop unless that's your thing, and I'm not here to judge. But it does need to follow the rules of your world's internal mythic logic. If you've established that your celestial wyvern can only cross realms during the lunar eclipse, and then suddenly, for no reason, it shows up in the middle of the day to save your hero because you forgot your own rules, well, that's when we get Game of Thrones Season 8 levels of what are we even doing here? Suddenly, ships can teleport. People cross continents in a lunch break. Ballistas either one-shot a dragon or miss entirely, depending on how dramatic the music is. That season ruined so much goodwill. Don't do that. You cannot just throw your own rules out the window whenever they're inconvenient. So that's the first kind of logic breaking, mythic logic. You've built your own mythical framework and you must stick to it. Otherwise, it turns into a Deus Ex Machina story and it shatters the reader's immersion. Okay, what is the second way you can tumble into this pit? You're working on a more grounded, world-integrated creature. It's still fantastical, but it exists within your world, not outside of it. Think owl bears, griffins, giant ice wolves, and so on. They're magical, yes, but they eat, they breathe, and they mate. They live in your setting. And here's where a lot of creators drop the ball. They forget about ecology. If it's a predator that you're creating, what does it hunt? What does that creature eat? Where does it sleep? What's its range? Does it migrate? What happens when food is scarce? How does it propagate? You don't need to go full David Attenborough here. No need for trophic pyramids or detailed energy cycles. Just treat your creatures like part of a living, breathing ecosystem. Your setting has climates, it has geographies, it has logic. A desert creature should behave like it actually lives in a desert. It might conserve water, be nocturnal, burrow underground, or reflect sunlight. An Arctic species might be bulky, insulated, low energy, or camouflaged against snow. Creating this kind of creature is exactly why I made a whole bunch of videos on biosystems and different ecologies, so that I could understand how real-world environments work and use that knowledge to make fantasy creatures feel real. And you can find those videos in the playlist linked in the information card. I go into things like desert survival, ocean-based predators, tundra dwellers, and much, much more. Because if you want to build something like a savanna predator, that's awesome. I am there for it. But think about how it fits into the savanna. What role does it play? What does it need to survive? What niche does it fill? So, to sum up, mythic creature, stick to your mythic logic. Naturalistic fantasy creature, make sure it fits into your world's ecosystem. Either way, don't break your own rules. And now, let's talk about issue number 4. And this one is a personal pet peeve of mine, almost as much as those Scottish accented dwarves. Monocultural sapient species. If you've ever watched my Mistakes World Builders Makes videos, you'll have heard me rant about the trope of the hats. And let me just say it again for the people in the back. I do not approve of trope of the hats. So what is trope of the hats? Trope of the hats is when everyone in a culture has the same traits. They're all brutish warriors. They're all wimpy scholars. They're all charming rogues or whatever. And that's it. That's what they are. That describes all of them. Now, this doesn't just apply to characters, and it doesn't even just apply to cultures. If you've ever watched one of my religious world building videos, you know what I always say. Real religions have sects. They are not monotone. People are different. Even if they all believe in the same God, they worship in slightly different ways. And those differences create sects and schisms and varieties in the religion. So, people get that about human cultures. They know human cultures should be different. But for some reason, when they create non-human sapient species, somehow that logic walks out the door and gets wings and flies away. And we end up with the dwarf culture, the elf culture, as though every single elf across an entire continent shares the exact same culture. Even though this set of elves lives in treetop cities, and those elves over there live out on the savanna grasslands, somehow they're culturally identical. In what universe does this even happen? Do elves have cultural vibrations that flutter across the land? Are they communicating their traditions by telepathic forest Wi-Fi? Because that's how I'm now imagining what's going on. And it is literally the only thing keeping me sane. Please, if you're going to go to the trouble of inventing a sapient species, give them different cultures. Add depth, add variety. Let geography, history, politics, and religion shape them into distinct societies, or at least subcultures. Sure, they'll still share traits. They're all elves after all. But just like humans, they should be diverse. And listen, you don't need to create subspecies to justify subcultures. Because I see you, Dragonlance, with your silver elves and your gold elves and your dark elves, each subspecies conveniently locked into its own culture. That is not how culture works. It makes my head want to explode just thinking about it. And worst of all, sometimes it's not a monoculture. It's a mono-personality. Every elf sounds the same. Every dwarf has the same priorities. They might as well just be named Elf 1, Elf 2, Elf 3. No distinguishing features, no individual goals. They're essentially just mouthpieces for plot. I am begging you, don't do this. Give your species variety. Give them individuality. Let them live. Okay, deep breath. With that rant out the way, let's get on to the final mistake I see people make. And this one ties directly into monocultures. And it is a lack of integration into the world, its history, and its systems. So, just like a fantasy species doesn't exist in an ecological vacuum, it also doesn't exist in a political vacuum. You can't just grab Tolkien's elves and drop them straight into George R. R. Martin's Westeros and say, Yeah, that works. No, no, it doesn't work. And you definitely can't just take a fantasy element, plop it into an otherwise normal world, and act like nothing changes. Oh, yeah, there's this one species that spits fire, and they just walk down the street in town like that's totally normal. No, it's not normal. How does that affect the world, the people, the politics of this place? Because if you just slap on your fantasy element, if you superglue elf ears onto a human and call it a day, what you end up with feels cheap and tacked on. And I'm an epic fantasy fan. I don't want dollar store elf ears. I want depth. I want your elves, your dwarves, your vampires, or your pink polka dot people to feel like they've been woven into the fabric of your world. I want them to matter in your world's history, politics, and cultures. I want appendices on world building. I want histories going back to the first age. Give me lore, not dollar store. So, ask yourself, are elves welcome in human cities? If yes, which? And which elves are welcome? Are humans welcome in elven ones? If not, are there elven cultures that are more welcoming than others, where humans might be tolerated in their cities? Do dwarves live in underground cities scattered across the continent? And if so, do they have trading outposts with humans, or do they keep to themselves and live isolated lives with their different cultures? Are there cosmopolitan centers where all species live together? Or are there xenophobic areas that bar anyone who doesn't look like them from entry? What about architectural scale? If you have giants, are there accommodations for them in cities? Or if you have tiny folk like Kenderkin or gnomes, is there architecture that shows this to the reader? Small little houses, huts, beds, tables, and so on. And most importantly, is there evidence that these species have been around for a long time? Do we see it in the architecture, in the myths, in the history, in the religions? Because that is what makes a world feel like a world. Your non-human sapient races should feel like they've been here all along, going back to your world's equivalent of the Stone Age. They shouldn't be glued on as an afterthought, but should be deeply, inextricably part of the setting. Unless they have just been dropped in here by a portal, in which case, show me that. Show me that portal. And those are the 5 mistakes I hate to see in fantasy world building when it comes to non-human sapient races. And that also wraps up this series. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments which mistakes drive you insane when it comes to non-human sapient species. Our next big series on this channel is going to be on building for different genres, and that'll be kicking off around November. In the meantime, I'll still obviously be dropping videos on whatever random world building topics catch my attention. A huge thank you to all of you for watching, and to my channel members who make videos like this possible and give me some financial stability, especially the just-in-timers of the Stone tier, Tony Lamanna, Katie Kofi Mug, Epic, Necromancer JM, A. Wellyard, Neil Buckley, and Laura Bones 79. Along with the Wood tier and the Straw tier, these guys help me a great deal. If you would like to support the channel right now, one free way is simply to watch another video. And if you like this video, you'll probably enjoy my video on economic mistakes world builders make, which you can check out right now on screen. Or you can follow whatever the algorithm is recommending to you. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.